crucial to Buddhist metaphysics or to the fundamental categories that we organize the stuff that the world is made up of are these three characteristics of everything that exists. The tree lakshana, as Buddhists say. Buddhists say that any object that you can identify bears these three basic properties, that everything is an object of dukkha or ultimate dissatisfaction. That is, that nothing can ever give you lasting happiness. Everything that you can put your finger on that you can name is anitya, impermanent. It's not going to last forever. And every object or substance is without any enduring essence over time. And these three things, of course, are all related. If everything is ultimately impermanent, then it's impossible to identify some core, some self, substrate, or Atman that perdures through time and can be identified as the essence of any given object. And if everything is impermanent, then nothing can be a source of lasting, guaranteed satisfaction, right? So everything ultimately is unsatisfactory in the sense that clinging to any object with the expectation that it's going to give you permanent happiness is tantamount to a form of delusion, essentially, Buddhists say. Such a worldview can seem negative, dispiriting, depressing. Nothing's going to make us permanently happy. Okay, well, then why should we quest after anything, right? And indeed, Buddhists in South Asia were historically accused by other religious groups of sliding towards nihilism or an attitude in which nothing ultimately matters. And so, why should we have to worry about anything? Doing right or doing wrong at all, right? Can't we just do whatever we want without having to worry about it? Rick Sanchez in Rick and Morty is a good example of a modern day nihilist, right? He's someone who doesn't actually care about anything, so he just makes the universe his playground for his great adventures. Buddhists, of course, eagerly defend themselves against charges of moral nihilism. I mean, remember that at least Buddhists still believe in karma, right? So the kinds of things that you do in previous lifetimes affect the kind of birth that you get in the future. So there is, at the very least, an argument to be made from a self-interested point of view that you should do good things and not harm others in order to experience personal happiness in the future. But the Buddhist argument doesn't end there, though. I mean, Buddhists maintain that it's important not only just to do good things for the sake of happiness in the future, but that also it's crucial to cultivate selfless compassion for others as a matter of the religious path. These are the 10 paramitas or the 10 perfections of the personality that any aspirant to Buddhahood has to work to refine over the course of many lifetimes. And you see virtues such as generosity, that is being willing to give anything you have to others, loving kindness, which means developing a benevolent disposition towards others, really towards all beings, including people that you've never met before, people that you are not predisposed to like. But these are, again, all aspects of Theravada Buddhism, the kind of Buddhism that we find in the yellow part of the map here in Southern Asia. And I mentioned last lecture that there remains this residual problem for Theravada Buddhists of the question of when and how you actually get out of the cycle of rebirth and obtain nirvana. Is nirvana a kind of intellectual realization? Okay, I understand all this stuff about no self. Am I enlightened now? Or does it require many hundreds, thousands of lifetimes to reform all these aspects of your personality to truly be selfless? And here, Buddhists are split on the matter. Buddhist sects, which developed from around the first century BCE onwards, and which become known under the umbrella term of Mahayana, the Great Vehicle, insist that there are shortcuts to enlightenment, or at the very least, that enlightenment is really kind of a state of mind, and a state of mind that direct realization of the truth make possible to really anyone at any time. Forms of Mahayana Buddhism prescribe certain life hacks or shortcuts to break through to what they call sudden realization, sudden awakening. Enlightenment for Mahayana Buddhists happens just as quickly as flipping on a light switch, right? So you're sitting there meditating, thinking, these are my memories, these are my sensations, these are my habits, my personality traits, these are mine, 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 mine. And when you get it, your entire frame of thinking shifts so that you just think memories are arising, sensations are arising, habits are arising. It's the same kind of sudden realization that you have when you stop playing tic-tac-toe. So who remembers how old they were, where they were when they stopped playing tic-tac-toe, right? I mean, most people, you play tic-tac-toe until you're in fourth grade or something like that, and then one day tic-tac-toe stops being fun. Why? Because you realize that if both people know all the possible moves, permutations of moves in tic-tac-toe, then no one is ever going to win, and it stops being fun. And from that moment onwards, you're never going to go back to playing tic-tac-toe wondering who's going to win, right? You're either going to win every time if you're playing against your 4-year-old cousin, or no one's going to win and it stops being fun and there's no point to it, right? Um, think about like the sudden realization that you have when you understand how to do long division. So when you're in third grade and your teacher's teaching you about division and she brings out all the boxes of macaroni and says, okay, well, it's 16 divided by 4 and gives you 16 macaronis and tells you to put them in piles of 4. 16 divided by 4 is 4. This is what division is, right? But then when you're in fourth grade or fifth grade and your teacher says, you know what? Actually, there's this magical way to do division where you can divide any two numbers that you can fit on a sheet of paper and you don't need any macaronis and you can do it very quickly. And this is called long division. And maybe it's a little bit hard at first, but eventually you get it. And then after that, do you ever have to go, once you understand long division, do you have to go back to using the macaronis to do division? I hope not, right? No, you suddenly understand this thing at a totally new plane of comprehension. And there's all kinds of religious allegories about what sudden realization is like, about the kind of total paradigm shift that happens when you get to a higher level of consciousness and understanding. Plato's allegory of the cave, for those of you who read this from Plato's Republic in another class. The movie The Matrix, where we get the term red pilled from, is another good example of this, right? Where everyone's perception of reality is really just a computer simulations being run in our head, a la the if everyone were hooked up to the metaverse, right? But if you take the red pill, then you can wake up to the reality, which is that we're all just bodies in vats, and the computers are harvesting our body heat to run their batteries. And in fact, everything that we've experienced from the moment of our birth was just this computer simulation, right? So we're sort of gone through the looking glass to a new level of reality. This is what sudden awakening is for Mahayana Buddhists. It's waking up to a new higher level of reality that was always there, but that we just weren't attuned to. In addition to sudden awakening, Mahayana Buddhists have this other crucial tenet of their belief system, which is that everyone, in order to be a Buddhist, should have as their objective not just to one day become enlightened themselves, but effectively to bring every other sentient being along towards enlightenment with them. It's possible in Mahayana Buddhism to obtain enlightenment, actually, to become fully enlightened, fully realized, to be free of all passion and attachment, but to remain in the cycle of rebirth because of one residual karmic bond, your desire to bring other beings to enlightenment as well. It's really this kind of bond of compassion, which means that you can be fully enlightened, die, but then be reborn again still as a fully enlightened being. The vow to bring other beings to enlightenment along with you is known as the vow of the Bodhisattva or the wisdom being. This is an example of a Bodhisattva vow. This is the vow to become enlightened and to assist other beings along the path to enlightenment, even once you yourself have achieved it. So bodhisattvas come in two varieties. Bodhisattvas are aspirants to enlightenment who have taken this vow, as well as those who have actually obtained enlightenment, fully realized bodhisattvas. who can take human birth or even birth as a celestial being, but who are essentially bound still to the cycle of samsara, even though they have obtained nirvana because of their one remaining desire to bring all sentient beings along with them. This is where the meaning of the word Mahayana comes from. Mahayana means the great vehicle, and the image is that all of us, every sentient being, is eventually headed towards enlightenment, right? And we're all on the bus headed towards universal enlightenment together. And no one is going to get off the bus until we all reach our final destination, right? No one is going to pass out of the cycle of rebirth until every single living being is enlightened. So for Mahayana Buddhists, there is actually an end point to all of this. There is actually a telos or an end of time when all sentient beings are going to be enlightened. It's the way things are going, a very long time in the future. But there is actually kind of an end point to this world we're inhabiting and transmigrating through. There are many, many different sects of Mahayana Buddhism. When I first started teaching this class, I tried to do a rundown of all the major ones, but it really is just too convoluted and complicated. So I'm going to restrict myself to talking about two that you've probably actually heard of before. One is Zen Buddhism, and the other is Tibetan Buddhism, also known as Vajrayana. So I'm going to say this, but keep in mind that there are many other schools of Mahayana Buddhism, each with their own unique theologies, beliefs, and practices. Zen is the Japanese pronunciation of Chan, which is itself the Chinese pronunciation of Sanskrit dhyana, which means an advanced meditative state. The entire point of Zen Buddhist philosophy and practice is really to shock the mind out of our ordinary way of thinking, that is, our ordinary egocentric, first person, self-oriented way of thinking and talking, in order to break through to the radically selfless patterns of thought germane to enlightened consciousness. So in Zen, where you come in, you start your practice, you come to the monastery with thoughts such as nirvana is my future goal. I must rid myself of defilements. Enlightenment can be achieved through my own effort. Thoughts like this for Zen are all self-defeating because they all involve first person sort of language, right? The notion that there is some I, there is some executive, there is something here that is responsible for and in charge of each of us and directing our efforts. When you go to a Zen Buddhist monastery, the traditional way of actually applying for admission is to go and prostrate yourself outside the front door of the monastery and wait for the preceptor, the head of the monastery, to come out and accept you. And you might have to wait a few hours or a few days or however long, and they might not actually come out at all. But if they do, and they take you in and they ordain you as a student, one of the things that they assign you right off the bat is a koan, or a poem to meditate on, which is your own personal device of reflection for breaking out of these established patterns of egocentric thought. And some of these koans you've probably heard before. What is the sound of one hand clapping if a tree falls in the woods and no one is around to hear it? Does it make a sound? Some koans make sense in light of the doctrine of anatman, or no self. So here's one: who is it who now repeats the Buddha's name? Who is dragging this corpse about? What is this? What is it? What was the original face before my father and mother were born? Who am I? Right. So this is a reflection on the question of the essence of the self. Some koans make a lot less sense. One of the most famous one of these is, if you see the Buddha on the side of the road, kill him. What does that, what does that one mean? Here's one. If a man has his head shaved, wears a monk's robes, and takes the shelter the Buddha gives, then why should he not be recognized as one who is aware of the Buddha? And the response of the master is, it is not as good to have something as it is to have nothing. Once a month, as a Zen Buddhist monk, you go before your master, recite your koan, and give some sort of reply to it, some sort of answer to it. So in the following video, you're going to see one of these rituals where the koan assigned to the student by the master is, does a dog have a Buddha nature? And you're going to see how the master responds after the student gives his interpretation of what a correct answer might be.
The novice repeated his koan. Does a dog have Buddha nature? His words were, you must put your strength in your abdomen, your middle, enter the state where there is no I and no world, and speak from emptiness. A word with the lips alone is no good.
So you see the student trying to give an answer that is outside the bounds of any routine way of thinking, outside the bounds of any actual dialogue or normal discursive forms of thought. And the master is giving him a B minus, it looks like, right? He's sort of on the right track, but maybe the student was trying a little bit too hard, right? The master tells him, you must speak from emptiness. A word from the lips alone is no good. The master seems to be saying that the novice is injecting too much of himself into his unconventional reply to the koan. Maybe the thought is, okay, I'm going to go ahead and throw the master a curveball and do something totally unexpected. But the truly Zen approach would be to go before the master with no pre-formulated answer or idea of what you're going to do, and to simply give whatever answer comes to you spontaneously when the moment calls for it. This would be speaking from emptiness. This is what Yoda implies to Luke when Luke is trying to levitate his X-Wing out of the swamp. The instant Luke steps out of his awareness of the present and has any notion of his own future failure or success, he's injecting his own ego and is out of alignment with the Force. He's no longer acting from emptiness, acting from the present moment. Mahayana Buddhism in Tibet takes on its own unique form there, where it's known as Vajrayana, the vehicle of the diamond thunderbolt, the Vajra. And one particularity of Tibetan Buddhism is the belief that the highest ranking monks of the Buddhist churches there are themselves enlightened beings who are serially reincarnated in order to assume their former position. High-ranking Buddhist monks, including the Dalai Lama, are known as tulkus. This is again something that's totally unique to Tibetan Buddhism, a system that's kind of developed over the last 400 years. It was originally a way of wresting the powers of the monasteries away from a small group of elite aristocrats who controlled the appointment of monks to the highest offices in the churches by having a few members of each family occupy offices within the church, would then appoint additional family members to kind of keep monasteries in their land holdings. You know, a monastery might own a great deal of surrounding land from which it collected taxes to keep all of that wealth within the family, so to speak. Sounds a lot like what was happening in the Roman Catholic Church during Martin Luther's time. So eventually, those monks who were fed up with the system said, okay, well, if we're all Buddhists and we all believe in reincarnation, then these senior monks, these bishops and cardinals of the church are going to be reborn, right? And who better to occupy these positions within the church than these people who held them in their previous lifetime? So, you know what? we're going to go out and find these former bishops and cardinals as they are reborn as little children somewhere in our nation of Tibet. And we're going to bring them back to the monastery and we're going to raise them up to allow them to assume their former position. And so there developed a tradition of senior monks near the end of their life, supposedly leaving clues as to where they were going to be reborn and where their co-religionists could go and find them. And these clues could take many different forms. There's one story about a former lama leaving a sort of written treasure map about, go to this village and take a left at this tree and the third house on the right. That's where you're going to find the reborn version of me. In the case of the current 14th Dalai Lama, the story is that the 13th Dalai Lama, the Dalai Lama who preceded him, died sitting in meditative posture, and his body was simply left to self-mummify, a practice that sometimes occurs in high elevation Buddhist countries. You can go ahead and Google mummified Buddhist monk to see some actual real life examples of this. Has to do with the dryness of the air and the nitrogen content of people's blood up in that part of the world. But anyways, the 13th Dalai Lama is said to have died in sitting in meditation, and his body was left there. And over the course of a few days, his head turned to the northeastern direction, and the monks of the monastery knew that if they walked out in this exact parallel, that they would come to where the Dalai Lama was, and aided by a series of visions, they come to this household of this the young kid whose brother had already renounced in their monastery, the Gaelic monastery, and they performed a series of tests on this kid, giving laying out a bunch of personal effects from the previous Dalai Lama, along with a number of decoys on a table, and asking them to pick out which ones were his. And of course, he goes through and he picks out the right bowl and the right glasses and the right cane and the right bell. So this is confirmation that he is in fact the 13th Dalai Lama reborn. And they take young Tenzin Gyatso back to the Potala Palace, the main monastery, and raise him up to be a continuation of his former self. And, whatever we think about the supernatural aspects of the Tulku system, it was a way of essentially democratizing the administration of the monasteries, because the young kids who are selected for these offices, not just the office of the Dalai Lama, but actually many hundreds of offices throughout the various schools of Tibetan Buddhism, these quote unquote reincarnated tulkus were drawn from all classes of society, right? So it was no longer just the aristocrats who ensured that their relatives would assume positions within the churches, but people from working middle class families could also be brought in and to be raised as a continuation of your former self meant receiving essentially a royal education, right? You get not only an education as a Buddhist monk, but also an education in statecraft, in literature. In the case of the Dalai Lama, education in how to run the state of Tibet, because for several hundred years, actually until recently when the current Dalai Lama renounced it, the position of the Dalai Lama was not only the head monk of the Gaelic school of Tibetan Buddhism, but was also the head of state of the nation of Tibet. The current Dalai Lama is a really kind of fascinating character who was born with one foot in a very traditional world of Tibetan Buddhism. And because of circumstances, really because of the invasion of Tibet by China in 1950, was forced onto the global stage and became this really significant international political and religious figure. It's really interesting to read about the current Dalai Lama's own attitudes towards traditional Tibetan Buddhism. He's very pro-science. He's really kind of fascinated by Western science, and he invites physicists to come to teach at universities in India, where there are many Tibetan Buddhist monks who are essentially refugees from Tibet today. And he's even willing to say that aspects of traditional Buddhist scripture which are contradicted by modern science should be discarded. So he's not dogmatic about the idea that traditional Buddhist scripture contains all the answers. He also, if you read between the lines, seems a little skeptical about this idea that he is, in fact, a reincarnation of the thousand-armed bodhisattva of compassion, Avalokiteshvara. In his interview with Pankaj Mishra for the New York Times, and when he's asked this question, "Do you believe you're a god?" He says, "Well, if I were a god, then why wouldn't I be able to fix my trick knee? Why do I have all these bodily pain? Shouldn't I be able to perform miracles and do whatever and live a pain-free life?" So you see that he's kind of someone who has a lot of self-awareness about his role in this traditional religious society and the role that he's been asked to play as a spokesperson for Buddhism, and as someone who has come to have a lot of respect for Western institutions, scientific, democratic, educational, because of the contested status of Tibet within the state of China today. The Dalai Lama has made no guarantee that he's going to be serially reincarnated again. That is, he said that there might not be a 15th Dalai Lama. And basically, he knows that if he were to say before he dies, okay, I'm going to be reincarnated, that the Tibetan community in exile in India would go and find his Tulku reincarnation somewhere there, presumably in India. And that the Chinese government, the PRC, which has integrated Tibet as a state of China, would find their own Dalai Lama, and there would be a contest of succession for who the true 15th Dalai Lama was. And he feels fairly certain of this because in 1995, the second highest office of the Gelug Church, the Panchen Lama, was this little kid who was 6 years old at the time, right? So the sort of a Panchen Lama presumptive, the declared reincarnation of the previous Panchen Lama. The Chinese Communist Party then organized the appointment of a new Panchen Lama in the wake of the abduction of the Dalai Lama approved Panchen Lama. And so there remain today really two Panchen Lamas, the Dalai Lama approved one and the CCP approved new appointee. And the current 14th Dalai Lama has no reason to suppose that something like this wouldn't happen again in the near future. So, for a long time, the Dalai Lama was an advocate for a free Tibet, that is a restoration of Tibet's complete sovereignty, right? Tibet as again, a sovereign nation. He's over the past 15 years or so really kind of given up on this vision because it doesn't seem very likely that China is going to give Tibet back after now 75 years. So the Dalai Lama today is an advocate for a middle path or a kind of compromise whereby Tibet can be an autonomous state within the nation of China, where it can have some state government autonomy and sovereignty, but still officially remain a part of China. There's a Mahayana Buddhist account of the death of the Buddha that presents the Buddha giving a final sermon to his monks when he's 80 years old and about to pass away, and saying, "Brethren, look to the east, the direction of the rising sun. After my departure, it's here that my dharma will be spread." And when we talk about the East with a capital E, where do we mean? Well, we mean east of us on a big map that you have in geography class in elementary school, which means, well, Asia usually, right? But where east is depends on where you are in the world. And if you're already in Asia, then east for you means across the Pacific Ocean over to, well, the Americas, right? And so some people have taken this account of the Buddha's last words as a kind of mandate or prediction that Buddhism would one day move from Asia to America. And indeed, this is a map of the second largest religion in each state. So the most populous religion in each state remains Christianity. But the second most populous religion in each state is represented by the color code here, with pink as Judaism, dark green as Islam, and orange as Buddhism. And you see that in pretty much every state from the Rocky Mountains and westward, Buddhism is the second biggest religion. There's really three major reasons why Buddhism is so popular in the western part of the United States. There's about 3.5 million people who identify as Buddhist, but Buddhism and Asian religions may have a little bit of an outsized influence on popular religious beliefs in America. This is one poll from a reliable polling agency that says that a third of Americans believe in reincarnation. So the reason why there are so many Buddhists in the Western United States has to do first with immigration, 19th century immigration of East Asians, Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, to the western coast of the United States, a later wave of immigrants from 1965 onwards from Southeast Asia, and also the effects of the American counterculture of the mid 20th century, the beat and the hippie movements, which had their epicenters in the West Coast and in California. The counterculture, was a time of exploration of all sorts, right? Exploration of lifestyles outside the social norm at the time, exploration with personal identity, and of course, exploration with religion as well. And Buddhism was attractive for some of the most influential figures of the counterculture because it was seen to be a highly individualistic religion, or a religion in which you had a great deal of personal freedom to determine how you were going to practice and who you were going to associate with. And I will say that counterculture figures like Jack Kerouac made Buddhism their own and kind of read into what they knew about Buddhism, their own form of libertarianism. But it's also true that because Buddhism demands so little in terms of confessional religious belonging, because there are so few rituals of conversion to Buddhism, even where they exist, usually you'll find out that they are things that have been sort of invented in relatively modern times. Buddhism is open to a variety of forms of adherence. There are people even who maintain dual religious belonging or dual religious identity, and people say, well, I'm a Christian or I'm a Jew or what have you, but I also do Buddhist meditation and I also consider myself a Buddhist. So that openness of Buddhism to the possibility of plural, multiple religious belonging has been one reason for its success in generating adherents of all kinds in America today.